Good morning, everybody. We're going to call the Historic Preservation Commission to order. City staff, please call roll.
Chairman Powers, Commissioner Doherty, Commissioner Harold,
Here.
Commissioner Kraus, here, Commissioner Maloof,
Here.
Commissioner Matuzak, and Commissioner Smith.
Great. We do have a quorum. Thank you, city staff. Next item on our agenda will be the approval of the April 25th, 2018 minutes. Commissioners, are there any comments or modifications pertaining to the minutes?
Yes.
Please proceed.
I think my question concerning disclosure of the spreading of ashes was an important question. It has not been picked up in the minutes. Thank you.
Any other comments, commissioners?
I'll move to approve as amended.
There's a motion to approve as amended by Commissioner Harold. Is there a second?
Second.
A second by Commissioner Kraus. Any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed say nay. Our next item is for new business in consideration of the presenter still in transit to City Hall. He's coming from Chicago. Would there be a motion to have item number 4? I guess maybe we'll proceed with item number 6 ahead of item number 4. Would there be a motion? Conduct the election of officers prior to new business.
Okay, I'll make the motion to move number 6 up.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's a motion by Commissioner Harold to have item number 6 heard of ahead of item number 4. There's a second by Commissioner Kraus. Those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed say nay. Okay. Next item of business is for our election of officers. Commissioners, is nominations for vice chair.
Should we defer this until next month since we're missing almost half of our members?
Do I hear a motion for a deferral?
I'd like to make the motion for deferral.
Second.
There's a motion to defer by Commissioner Maloof. There is a second by Commissioner Harold to defer until the next regularly scheduled meeting. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Thank you. It's been deferred. And just so everybody knows, our format is fairly simple here at the Historic Preservation Commission. Generally, when we don't have a formal case today to hear, but when we do, we'll generally call the case and city staff will present what information that they have for the case, and then we'll open the case with the petitioner's representative. Today we have a review as well as for public input regarding national historic district to be reviewed, which ultimately the state will review. So it's more for public input today. And we are in the process of we're waiting for someone to come from Chicago that is going to speak on this matter. And City Staff Smith, the status of that is that this person is in transit right now, is that correct?
He is. If you'd like, I can go ahead and open the case. We have a few handouts. I spoke to him on the phone a moment ago, and he thought he was about 10 minutes.
Okay, that'll be fine. So,
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Before we do that, I don't know if the audience is waiting to address that or if they're here for something else. Do we want to move citizens' opportunity up? See if anybody wants to speak to that, if they're not waiting for the national.
We can do that. So is there a motion to defer new business and have Item number 5, citizens' opportunity to address the commission heard in advance. Is there a motion?
Moved.
Commissioner Smith, you had a point of clarification?
Yeah, a question. If we do that, then will there also be an opportunity for citizens to respond after the presentation?
I believe we will,
Yes.
policy of our commission always allow public input.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, there's a motion by Commissioner Harold, a second by Commissioner Maloof. Any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Okay, any citizens' opportunity to address the commission? Anything that you would like to discuss with the commission, you can speak now. If you'd like to come forward and speak your name for the record, you're welcome to speak to the commission. Is there anybody from the public wishing to speak to the commission? Any questions, comments, concerns? You're welcome to.
Okay.
Okay? Being none, we'll close the public, citizens' opportunity to address the commission. Okay, next item,
Okay, and
new business.
apologies that we are still waiting. If you don't mind, I'll go ahead and introduce the case.
Okay.
And then I printed out some handouts, mostly from your packet, but things to call your attention to in the meantime. This is something we don't have very often before the commission. It is a National Register District designation, so I'll go ahead and introduce. The case item is to review comment and its solicitation of public remarks regarding the downtown Peoria Historic District National Register nomination, roughly bounded by North William Kampf Boulevard, Fulton Street, Perry Avenue, Fayette, and Water Streets. You do have a map that was handed to you that does show you the boundaries. We have a few extras if anyone in the audience wanted a copy. Yes, no? Oh, in perfect timing. We're just introducing the case. I was so sorry about my mess. I'm going to hand out this map just quick, and I will open the case and then hand it over. Okay. An application was submitted to create a new National Register District of the downtown Peoria Historic District. It will be presented to the Illinois Historic Sites Advisory Council, June 29th, 2018. As a certified local government, the commission has the opportunity to review, comment, and solicit public remarks on the nomination. The commission may also advise why the subject place does or does not satisfy the National Register criteria, and explain the reasons for the advice. Input from the commission will be forwarded to the Illinois State Historic Preservation Office for inclusion with the nomination. So you've got a packet that does include the application. You also have a letter. This particular one that's in your packet was addressed to me, but there are a number that have gone around to the city, including to the mayor. And that's the one that we'll be responding on, where it explains, if I may read these two paragraphs, that the nomination per the state has satisfied the National Register standards for documentation by the State Historic Preservation Office. Before the nomination is presented to the Illinois Historic Sites Advisory Council, we as a certified local government have the opportunity to review, comment, and solicit public remarks on the nomination is provided by 36 CFR Part 61. By the same regulations, the Peoria Historic Preservation Commission has the opportunity to advise why the subject place does or does not satisfy National Register criteria and explain reasons for the advice. If the Commission's recommendation and that of the chief elected official are not, well, that's just the dates, I'm sorry. And it basically goes on to say that we will be on the agenda regardless of them receiving comments. You also have in front of you a review sheet that was provided by the state. It's a fairly simple form. And then there's procedures, just for your own information, on how objecting or not objecting works. And then I also went ahead, if need be, I just straight off the internet printed the criteria, so I may pass that out while Nick speaks. And then if you want to sit here, or we can move you over to the podium, this is the one that's connected, and we have your presentation. So if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to hand over the presentation to Nick. And
Just go to slideshow.
should I just let you trade your places? All right, thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for coming from Chicago to our commission, and if you could speak your name for the record.
My name is Nick Caloderisis. I'm a associate principal at the Lakota Group, and we're a planning and urban design firm based in Chicago, and we do preservation planning here around the state and elsewhere. And yes, you're right, there, at 6 o'clock in the morning, there is traffic in Chicago, so I got a nice discovery of that. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm going to provide a very short presentation about the Downtown National Register District. We had the distinct pleasure to prepare that for the city, and it's been a wonderful process, and we think it's going to have some positive impacts in the downtown going forward. So we're very, very pleased to be a part of it. Just to go over the presentation a little bit, I'm sure you all know the National Register of Historic Places, but I'll just give you an overview for the public as well, and then talk about the nomination, what's inside the nomination, talk a little bit about the district architecture as well, and then I think Tim has already given you an overview of the next steps, but just to talk about that a little bit, and then answer any questions you might have about the nomination. So, going forward, I think the overall purpose of listing approximately a little more than 80 buildings in a National Register District, obviously, is to recognize the distinctive architecture in the downtown as well as the distinctive history. As we were preparing this nomination, we discovered a lot of really cool things about your downtown. There's a lot of great architecture and a lot of great history, and it's I think, a really wonderful project. So obviously, it's just to recognize the architecture and the history of the downtown. As you probably are aware, the National Register of Historic Places is this nation's official list of buildings, structures, sites, and objects worthy of preservation. It was authorized by the National Historic Preservation Act in 1966, and it's managed by the National Park Service in cooperation with the Illinois State Historic Preservation Office. Currently, there's probably around 80,000 buildings in the National Register, representing about 1.4 million individual buildings across the country. As you are aware, properties and districts in the National Register are listed only by nomination, and there's a nomination process that's managed by the Illinois SHPO, the city being a certified local government, obviously, and the National Park Service. And as I'm sure you're aware, as the public is aware, there's 4 National Register districts already in Peoria, so this is going to be the 5th one. Just for the public's sake, is just some background information. The National Register places no restriction on the use of property, as we all know. Unless there is any projects that are federally funded or state funded, then there is a mandatory review process for any impacts on those National Register listed properties. So that's the Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act and Section 707 of the Illinois Historic Preservation Act. The benefits, probably the main benefits of obviously why we're pursuing a National Register District for the downtown, is that commercial buildings, income-producing buildings are eligible for the 20% Federal Historic Preservation Tax Credit. And here in Illinois, lucky for Peoria, buildings would also qualify for the River Edge Redevelopment Zone Tax Credit, which adds another 25%. And I'm sure all of us are aware of the major impact both these credits have had in the warehouse district. So obviously, it's our hope that these credits will have the same impact in downtown. The National Register Evaluation Criteria, Kim has handed out the information on that. It's pretty straightforward. To be eligible for the National Register, a property needs to be 50 years or older, and then it must also satisfy one of 4 criteria. And criteria A being it must be associated with a significant historic event or trend, the property associated with the lives of a significant person, the property must represent distinctive design or construction, or the property has the potential to reveal some archaeological data. For the Peoria Downtown National Register District, it's eligible for both A and C. So the nomination is significant. Downtown is significant for its contribution, actually for its association with the commercial development of Peoria, also significant for its significant architecture. And we'll talk a little bit about the architecture in a moment. To talk about the period of significance when you establish or when you nominate a district to the National Register, there has to be a period of significance. We've established the period between 1867. It's the earliest building in the downtown. And it's a building on Main Street. I can't remember the exact address right now. And it goes all the way to 1967, which is the 50-year cutoff period. So you have obviously 100 years worth of significance in the downtown. So there's a wide range of architecture, a wide range of historical associations that are important. The bottom 3 bullet points kind of talk about what makes the downtown National Register District significant in terms of its commercial importance. And we define 3 specific periods, and it's in our draft nomination. The first period being the late 19th century growth of Peoria, and downtown's growth due to the industrialization of Peoria, especially with the warehouses and the whiskey industry being a major factor in driving commercial growth. And so some of the earliest architecture is kind of associated with that history. The second period is really the earliest 20th century where downtown Peoria came into its own. And we call that I call it the skyscraper period, because some of your early commercial buildings, the Central National Bank building for one, the Block and Cool department store being another, are the early skyscrapers in Peoria. And the Block and Cool in particular being a steel frame constructed building, the first fireproof constructed building in Peoria. So there are a number of buildings that represent this period as really a consolidation of the commercial importance of downtown, not just for retail, but for office, the center of government, and so forth. And then the third period being the mid-century period, right after World War II, when downtown, like many downtowns across the country, experienced dramatic change with the urban renewal period, where whole sections of the downtown changed to accommodate new development types, property types, the world headquarters, Caterpillar, being the most significant. So those are the 3 main periods that are described in our nomination and why we believe it's significant in terms of the commercial development. And then the inventory, just to give you some background, the boundary of the district encompasses 77 acres approximately. There are 83 commercial institutional buildings that are included in this nomination. 57 of them, we call them contributing, obviously, because they contribute to the significance of the district. There are 19 that are non-contributing, mainly because either they're outside the period of significance or the buildings were altered at some point. There is 1 contributing site, and that is your courthouse square. There is 1 contributing and 1 non-contributing object. The 1 contributing object is the Soldier and Sailors Monument. The non-contributing object is the World War I and World War II Memorial, which was installed in the courthouse square in 2006, I believe, or 2009. So that's why that's non-contributing. There already are 4 individually listed National Register properties in the district, Central National Bank being one of them, and I just can't remember the others now. Madison Theater being the other, the Paramount Hotel, and somehow I'm missing the 4th. I can't remember the 4th. I'll remember it. But there's another one. Yeah. So that's the district inventory overall. Here's the map that shows the boundary of the district. The dark color buildings are the ones that are contributing to the district. The light color ones are not. So we've captured, as you can see, the boundary extends from Water Street to the southeast, all the way to the northwest, where we include the Mohammed Temple, all the way to the top. Now to talk about the architecture, what is really distinctive about this historic district is the wide range of architecture. You have architecture that dates all the way from the 1860s, where most of those buildings are of the Italianate and Romanesque design. And as you can see, in the 1900s is where we had, as I talked about earlier, about the skyscrapers. Those skyscrapers are kind of reminiscent of the Chicago School of Architecture, where the first steel frame buildings were being built, and the architecture expressed that framing. But that framing was cloaked in classical revival ornamentation, so there's a lot of distinctiveness there. And as you can see, all the way into the 20s and the 1940s and 60s is when we edged into modernism, and you have some wonderful international style buildings. And then I think there's probably always going to be people saying, wow, 1960s, there's historic architecture in the 1960s? Yes, there is, certainly. And you have some wonderful, probably some really exemplary examples of brutalism in your downtown, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And just to give you a representation of the architecture in the district, and again, the earliest architecture, as you can see, as we have identified, this is just one example, is the Singer Barker Wheeler Warehouse Building at 424, 426 Washington Street. This is from circa 1970s. It's very typical of the architecture and design for that period. Some of these early Italianates, as you can imagine, served warehousing functions. Warehousing functions did creep this far north into the downtown, so you have many of these types of buildings that serve warehousing functions rather than just pure commercial functions. Probably one of the more intact sets of Italianate commercial buildings, obviously, is your 300 block of Main Street, and we call this the High Victorian Italianate, 315 Main Street, circa 1870s. This block is wonderfully intact. It gives a really good representation of what downtown looked like from the 1880s all the way into the 1910s. And then as we move on into the history of the downtown, we get into the Romanesque. Again, we're back on Water Street. This is the second Oak Ford and Fair and Stock wholesale grocery store warehouse. Some of you may know the first warehouse is on the other side of the street on Washington, but this was an annex to them. And this is a typical Romanesque, brick, heavy Romanesque, and it served a warehousing function. And as we move into the turn of the century, as I've mentioned, downtown became much more commercialized. Rent values, land values were increasing. The corner of Jefferson and Fulton was the sort of the 100% retail corner in the community, and it remained so all the way up until the 1970s. And as you can see on the right is the Block and Cool, its first rendition around 1907 when it was first built. And you can see the big white store sign at the very top up there. And again, as I've said, Adams Street in this corner became a very big focal point for commercial activity. And as we move on into the 1910s, as I've said, we began to see skyscrapers, bigger buildings being built. This is the Jefferson Building, first built in 1910. It was added in 1924. It was probably, we think, one of the last designs of William LeBaron Jennings' office, because he passed away around 1910. I think it was 1910 that he passed, so this had to have been one of his last designs. And again, this is a Chicago school building, very expressive of the steel framing underneath, but it has a very nice classical revival cornice at the top, fenestration at the bottom, and we also call this a three-part commercial building because there's a base, middle, and a top to it. So this is again very indicative of how important downtown Peoria became at the turn of the century. There are many other buildings, skyscraper buildings. This is another one. This is in the Renaissance Revival. This was designed by Hewitt and Emerson. The Commercial Merchants National Bank Building, first constructed in 1926. And then expanded to the south in 1930. And again, very expressive of its steel frame, but it's got a very historicist bottom, a Renaissance Revival bottom to it. And then as we move into the 1920s and 1940s, we have the Art Deco, sort of the forerunner of modernism to come in, after World War II. We sort of lose the ornamentation, we become more streamlined, less ornamented, very expressive of pure facade materials. We have at the top the Art Moderne J.J. Newberry Company Store building, built in 1941 at 123 Southwest Adams Street. And then probably a jewel, I'm sure you might be aware, kind of a jewel of a building, I think, is the Larkin Economy Store building, also in the Art Deco at 408 Southwest Washington Street. We believe the building was built earlier in the 1880s from our investigation, but it was refaced in the 1930s to make the building look more modern. And I'm sure you're probably aware about the Larkin Economy Stores. Actually, Peoria was the first. This is a Buffalo-based retail chain, and Peoria was their first outpost outside of Buffalo. So we're not sure if this is the original location of the Larkin store, but it ended up here before it closed, I think, in the 1940s. As we move into after World War II, as I've said, many cities like Peoria, many cities embarked on extensive urban renewal projects as a way to sort of revitalize the downtown. This is a period when the first shopping malls and first shopping centers were being built, and so retail gravitated to those centers, and downtowns were trying to figure out a way in which we can bring businesses back, revitalize it, make it the center. And Peoria, back in the early 60s, embarked on its own urban renewal program. I don't know if you noticed, you probably can't see it from where you're sitting at, but there's a description at the top says, Heart of Downtown Peoria Urban Renewal without using federal monies. So Peoria was claiming we're doing this all without federal money, so we're embarking on this ambitious program of urban renewal. And this is a sketch from a publicity brochure, and as you can see, there was a lot of different projects that were happening in the late 50s, early 60s. Probably the big one, obviously, as we know, the biggest urban renewal project was the construction of Caterpillar's World Headquarters. This is in the international style, constructed in 1967 at 100 Northeast Adams Street. It was designed by the New York firm of Smith, Lundberg, Whaler, and Smith, Lundberg, and Whaler. Thomas Church, who is a well-known landscape architect, designed the plaza spaces. So this is marvelously intact. I wouldn't be surprised if this was individually eligible in the National Register. So it's a very significant building. And one story we learned when we did the research, I'm sure probably all of you may have read this, but the Caterpillar folks did not want to build their world headquarters until the old courthouse was demolished first. I don't know if you've heard that story or not. The head of Caterpillar at that time did not like the old courthouse. So he wanted to see the old courthouse demolished and something new and brand new and more modern developed, and he got his wish. And the county accommodated him, and then Caterpillar built their headquarters. So I don't know if any of you knew that story or not. And then last but not least, as we go towards the end of the time spectrum in your downtown, I know this is probably not the prettiest building in the downtown, but it is historic. It's the first Federal Savings and Loan Tower. It was designed by two firms, Swenson and Cott, a Nashville, Tennessee-based firm, and Verkler and Tinsman, which is a Peoria-based firm. And of the time, brutalism is an expression of concrete. How do we express this new material in a very spare, modern way? So that's sort of the time spectrum of your architecture. And then just to close, I wanted to give you sort of a background of the process that we went through to do the nomination. We did the inventory of the downtown in November, December in 2017. I can tell it was very cold those days. It was very cold to do that. We spent January doing background research. We do have to give a very hearty thanks to the Peoria Public Library and to Kim for helping us out in a lot of research. There's a marvelous collection of local resources there, and they were extremely helpful, so we want to give them a very big thanks. We prepared the nomination in February, and then we submitted the draft to the Illinois Historic Preservation Office in March. We revised the nomination and gave them a revised draft. It's the draft that you have in front of you. And then the steps going forward, the public comment period is starting next week. So the public will have a chance to comment, to say yes or no about the district. And then the Illinois Historic Sites Advisory Council meeting is on June 29th, which will be in attendance. And then after that will be the National Park Service. I have to think by July or early August, we should hear from them about the nomination. And then last but not least, I think we all kind of know what the benefits are for National Register listing. I think obviously it is a big boon for revitalization and reinvestment. To have 2 tax credit programs available to you, I think is a significant advantage in tool, and we hope that many property owners and developers will take advantage of those tax credits to rehabilitate buildings. But we think also there's a lot of other benefits. It maintains a sense of place. It builds Peoria's brand in a lot of ways. It helps encourage better design in your downtown. It protects the investment of people who have already made some investment. And we hope that it's going to build some community pride in terms of the wonderful architectural resources that you have in your downtown. So, that's it. Thank you.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for the presenter?
I have a couple questions. First, what is the process to notify all the owners within that district so they have an opportunity to object or support?
Well, since the requirements are for the National Register, if there's a district that's over 50 property owners, the requirement is to publish an announcement in the local newspaper. That's the only legal requirement. The National Register is to just have that legal announcement in the newspaper.
So nobody's notified via certified mail or anything?
Yeah.
Okay. And my second question is, how do you determine the boundaries of this district? Because most striking to me is that we've left out the Kickapoo Building, the Marquette Apartments, the Don Meyer Temple, Spalding School, some of these seemingly significant buildings.
Thanks for that question. To answer your question, it was decided by the Illinois SHPO, basically. When we did the inventory in December, we did inventory a wider area. We went as far north, as the Kickapoo Building. We went all the way over to the former YMCA building, and we went all the way west to past to City Hall here. And we presented our inventory to the SHPO, and they were the ones that made the decision to shrink the boundaries, mainly because they felt the boundaries that we had initially suggested had too many non-contributing buildings in it. And they wanted a very tight district that had less non-contributing buildings. The other factor is that there were a number of big parking lots between buildings, especially when you get between the Kickapoo and the YMCA building. And the SHPO really, they basically want to get as tight a district as possible and as less parking lots, less non-contributing buildings. So we were disappointed, actually, that they shrunk the boundaries, but they felt this was a very defensible boundary to present it to the National Park Service. On the other hand, yes, plus the Kickapoo Building, the Marquette Building are already in the National Register individually. The YMCA was kind of a disappointment to us because that's another modern building that's very distinctive, and they feel that that is probably individually eligible to the National Register itself. So when they told us that, we felt okay with the boundaries that they suggested.
Did they clarify why they wanted to leave out the GAR building? I mean, because that seems contiguous to the main block.
It's also listed in the National Register.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioners? I'm not sure if you would be the appropriate one to answer the question or not, but once in the National Historic boundaries, and I know there's no restrictions on the buildings, but things like demolition and things like extreme facade changes, for example, the Larkin building was changed in the 1930s. If somebody came along and said, well, I want to give it a 2018 facade, there's really nothing that appears to regulate that other than, would they have to go back through the SHPO for major changes like that, since they are contributing buildings, and would they be considered, I guess, an owner could do whatever they want, and then all of a sudden it could be a non-contributing building, is that correct?
Correct, yes. The only controls that come in place, well, there's two instances where it would come in place. One is if a property owner sought the tax credits. If they sought the tax credits, they have to abide by the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. So that comes into play. The other instance is if there's a federally funded project or a state-funded project that comes through the downtown and may impact certain resources, then there's a mitigation process that has to happen to address any adverse impacts on historic buildings. And then the only other instance that you would want, that you could control anything that would happen in the district is if you established a local historic district there.
Thank you. Any other questions for the presenter? Great. I'd like to open up this review process to the public, and anybody wishing to speak now, now's the opportunity. If you'd like to come forward and speak your name to the record. Second call, anybody from the public wishing to speak regarding this for public input. Any remarks, comments? None. Commissioners, any other comments at this point?
Just to clarify, we're not voting on anything on this?
That is correct. This is just an advisory for them. Is that correct, city staff?
Well, and I guess for what it's worth, if we were going to submit comments, I would suggest that we ask to include those buildings I referenced, the Marquette Building, the GAR Hall, the Women's Club, the Kickapoo Building, the former Y Building, but I guess it doesn't matter, but those would be my comments.
Okay. So noted. We don't have to make a motion on it. So noted.
Mr. Chairman?
Please.
For clarification, Marquette, Kickapoo, the Y, GAR, Spalding, there was one more.
Don Temple. The Don Meyer Temple, Obed and Isaacs.
Oh, yes.
And women's.
The Women's Club, did you have that?
Okay.
Has that motion been made?
There is no motion on this.
It's just comments.
Advisory comments.
To exclude them is to exclude, those are 6 or 7 significant buildings. And I'm like Mr. Herron, I would regret missing the opportunity to get them included.
Okay. So noted. Any other comments, commissioners? I would say that these properties that have been outlined today, and with Commissioner Harold's input, having a financial tool in order to assist these properties and the incentives to help preserve these properties for the next generation while at the same time promote business, I think is a tremendous for our community, and I think having a downtown National Historic District on the register is definitely appropriate, definitely. Any other comments, commissioners? Okay, we'd like to thank you for coming today. Thank you for your time and, your hard work into this, and, we wish you well on your next appearance in Springfield, I believe. So, thank you. And thank you, city staff. I know it took a considerable amount of time with, working with staff, and I know you put some time into this as well, so, we'll close out item number 4, and then, do we need to have another opportunity for citizens to address the commission? I guess not. And then we'll move for adjournment.
Moved.
So moved by Commissioner Harold, is there a second? Second by Commissioner Kraus, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Say nay. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you.